He sat right across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Mira used to place his lunchbox when he was little. The sunlight spilled in through the side window, catching the edge of the glass he was sipping water from. There was a softness in his face. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was strategy. Either way, it didn't matter, because I had already made my decision. In front of me sat my 34-year-old son, Kian, my only child, the boy I raised alongside my wife, Mira, for over 3 decades. The same boy who, somewhere along the way, had grown distant. Not in anger, but in silence. He was dressed in his usual fitted jacket, gold watch peeking out from the cuff, and that real estate agent smile that could sell you a house even if it was missing half its roof. He placed the documents in front of me, neat and stapled. "Mom," he said, with that easy charm he always saved for when he wanted something. "It's just a cosign. The loan's already approved. I just need your name on this to get the better rate. It's nothing big. You'll never have to pay anything. It's just a formality." I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I reached down into my handbag and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope. It was sealed, slightly yellowed, and had one sentence written across the front in Mira's neat, looping handwriting. "To Kian, when you need me most." He raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" I slid it across the table, placing my hand firmly on the documents. "I'll sign," I said quietly, "but only if you read this first, out loud, here, right now." He looked at me like I'd just asked him to sing the national anthem in the grocery store. "Is this one of your life lesson things?" "It's not mine," I said. "It's from your mother. She wrote it before she passed. I was told to give it to you when the time felt right." He chuckled a little, a nervous deflection. "Mom, come on, this feels dramatic." I didn't laugh. I just looked at him. Not as his mother, not as a woman who once ironed his school shirts, but as someone who had spent 3 years in silence, slowly disappearing from her own son's life, and watching him not even notice. He sighed, leaned back, and finally opened the envelope. The paper crackled, her favorite kind, heavy and textured. I remembered how she loved the feeling of pen on real paper, said emails never carried weight. I watched his hands. Still strong. Still the hands I once held when he broke his arm at age 7. Still the hands she held every time she whispered goodnight to him, even when he rolled his eyes as a teen. Still the same hands, now wrapped in entitlement and confidence. But underneath, I wondered if any of the softness was still there. Before he began reading, I spoke again, my voice soft but firm. "You asked for my name, my credit, my signature. But before I give you any of that, I need you to hear hers." He looked at me for a long moment, not angrily, not even confused, just unsure. As if he suddenly realized this wasn't going to be a 5-minute favor. Then slowly, he unfolded the letter. "I won't tell you everything she wrote, not yet. That moment is still his to finish, but I can tell you what changed inside me while he began reading it." Something shifted. The kitchen didn't feel so small anymore. It didn't feel like I was the one left behind. For the first time in years, I felt the room tilt slightly back in my direction. Not because I had control, but because I finally remembered I didn't need to beg for a seat at my own table. As he read the first line, his voice dropped, and the man in the tailored jacket, the one who never returned calls, who forgot holidays, who texted me updates about my own grandchild, that man began to vanish. In his place, piece by piece, the boy Mira and I raised started to return. Because this wasn't about a house. It was about memory. It was about legacy. And it was about whether a woman's words, written in love, in sorrow, in hope, could still matter, even after she was gone. They did. They mattered more than the loan, more than the interest rate, more than the shiny kitchen countertops Kian wanted to install. They mattered because for once, my son had to sit, still and present, and listen to a voice that once centered his world. and that now might save his soul. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before everything began to unravel, our life was, for lack of a better word, steady. We weren't flashy people. Mira never wore diamonds, and I never cared for designer furniture. Our home was simple. 2 stories, creaky stairs, an overgrown rosemary bush outside the kitchen window, and walls filled with framed photos and Mira's dried flower arrangements. But what it lacked in luxury, it made up for in something far rarer: peace. Mira had a way of making even the ordinary feel sacred. She folded our lives into small, thoughtful rituals: handwritten notes tucked into lunchboxes, Sunday morning lemon muffins with powdered sugar, classical music in the background while she graded papers. I was the quiet one, the one who paid bills, mowed the lawn, and cleaned the gutters without being asked. Mira was the color, the softness, the one who remembered birthdays not just with a text, but with a card and a slice of someone's favorite cake. And then there was Kian. He was our only child, and in those early years, you would have thought we orbited around him. Maybe we did. He was sharp from a young age, quick with numbers, competitive in sports, and always the first to argue his point, even when he was wrong. But there was a gentleness in him too, especially with Mira. He'd come to her for everything: scraped knees, math tests, heartbreaks. And every time Mira made space for him, she'd sit on the edge of his bed and listen. Really listen. As if nothing in the world mattered more than what was on his mind. Even as he got older and busier, he still called her when he couldn't figure something out. In college, it was how to cook eggs without burning them. After that, how to write a condolence email for a friend's loss. It was always Mira he turned to. Me? I stayed in the background, not out of resentment, but out of respect. She understood him in a way I sometimes couldn't. There was one winter that I think about often. Kian was 24, just getting started in real estate. He had hit a rough patch, deals falling through, pressure mounting. He came home late one night, parked his car in the driveway, and just sat there, engine off. I watched from the living room window. Mira didn't say a word. She put on her coat, walked out into the snow, opened the car door, and slid into the passenger seat beside him. They sat there in silence for nearly an hour. When they finally came inside, his face was tear-streaked. Hers was calm, and neither of them ever told me what was said. But after that night, something in him changed. He got sharper, hungrier, more focused. Mira always believed in gentle guidance. Not demands, not lectures, just presence. And it worked until the day it didn't. After she passed, everything shifted. Kian became efficient. He stopped calling as often. He visited but rarely stayed long. His conversations became shorter, more transactional. At first, I made excuses for him: new baby, career, responsibilities. But the truth was harder to admit. Without Mira as the bridge, we were becoming strangers living in memory of the same person. Still, back then, I didn't see it clearly. I was still clinging to the idea that love, once planted, could grow on its own. And part of me believed Kian still carried Mira's voice somewhere deep inside him. Like a compass, he didn't even realize he was following. I remember the last real moment of closeness between us. It was the spring after her funeral. Kian came over with a basket of groceries and offered to help cook dinner. We chopped vegetables side by side, just like he used to do with Mira. We didn't talk much, but at one point, I asked if he missed her. He paused, just for a second, and said, "Yeah, I think I still hear her voice when I'm driving alone." That night, we ate quietly, and for a little while, I believed we were okay. But it wouldn't last. Not because something big happened, no betrayal, no argument, just slow forgetting. Phone calls became texts. Texts became delayed replies. And eventually, I became someone he updated, not someone he shared with. But back in those early days after Mira's death, I still believed the distance was temporary, that things would recalibrate. That love, our love, would find a way back. I filled the house with noise to drown out the silence, radio, cooking shows, anything. I went through Mira's old letters and journals, pretending I was organizing, but really I was searching. For what, I didn't know. Maybe a line that would tell me what to do, maybe a hint of how to stay important when you're no longer needed. But for a while, life still looked okay from the outside. Kian would stop by now and then with his wife. They'd bring their newborn, sit for coffee, talk about housing markets. He smiled, I smiled. No one said the words we were all avoiding, that Mira had been the glue and now everything was coming undone, politely, quietly, invisibly. In those days, I still kept the house clean, just in case someone dropped by. I still cooked double portions, just in case he stayed for dinner. I still believed I had a place in his life. I didn't realize back then that sometimes the deepest wounds are made not by what is done to you, but by what's slowly taken away without a word. It was almost a year after Mira passed when the first cut came, not sharp, not obvious. Just a small comment, dropped casually, the way you might mention the weather, but it lodged somewhere deep inside me and never really left. Kian had stopped by one Saturday. No warning, no reason, which should have felt nice, but something about it felt off. He walked in briskly, still wearing his Bluetooth earpiece, pacing around the kitchen as he finished a call about a property in Glenridge. When he hung up, he gave me a brief smile and said, "Hey, Mom, you doing good?" I nodded and offered him some of the stew I'd been simmering since morning. It was Mira's recipe, chicken, barley, and thyme. The house smelled like comfort, like her. But Kian didn't sit. He opened a bottle of water, looked around, and said, "So, have you thought more about downsizing?" I turned from the stove, my hand still holding the ladle. Downsizing? He leaned against the counter, casual as ever. "Yeah. I mean, it's just you in this place now. 5 bedrooms, big yard, high maintenance, and this neighborhood's values are peaking. You could sell this for a fortune, move somewhere smaller, maybe closer to us." I didn't respond right away. I just stirred the pot gently. The room was quiet except for the soft bubbling of the stew and the ticking of the wall clock, the one Mira had chosen because she liked its soft gold rim. "Are you suggesting I move out of the house your mother and I built together?" Kian shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "It's just a house, Mom. I mean, I get it, it's sentimental. But wouldn't it be nice not having to take care of all this alone? I could connect you with a great realtor. It wouldn't take long." Just a house. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it, but inside, something cracked. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what made it worse. It wasn't malicious. It was efficient, practical, cold. This was the same boy who used to cry when Mira forgot to pack 2 cookies in his lunch instead of 1. The same boy who once carved his name into the old oak tree in the backyard and told me, "Now we'll never forget this house." And now, it was just a property to him, a liability to be sold, a memory to be cashed in. I forced a smile and said, "Let's eat before it gets cold." He didn't notice anything had shifted. Not in me, not in the room. We sat and ate at the table that had held 2 decades of birthdays, homework, arguments, and handwritten anniversary cards, and he scrolled through his phone between bites, telling me about an upcoming development near the river. I kept nodding, but my mind drifted. Mira would have never let this happen. She would have said something, maybe playfully, "Kian, the woman just lost her soulmate. Let her breathe before she trades her memories for a townhouse." But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. That was my mistake. Not speaking up. Not making him see that what he called practicality was, in truth, erosion. Erosion of what we built, of what I still held dear. It's strange how people don't notice when they start pushing you aside. It's never a shove. It's a slow lean, a gentle redirect, a suggestion wrapped in concern. It's for your own good. You'll be happier. This is smart. But deep down, I knew what it was, the beginning of being managed. That night, after he left, I sat in the living room alone. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there with a cup of tea, staring at the dark screen of the TV, and felt something new. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was erased. Bit by bit, my place in his life, in this world Mira and I created, was being edited, made more convenient, more compact, less me. And the worst part? He didn't even notice. The next day, I watered the plants Mira used to love and skipped breakfast. I walked through the house room by room, looking at everything through new eyes. The framed photos, the worn rug she picked out at that market in Vermont, the bookshelf she alphabetized every January like clockwork. Just a house? Maybe to him, but not to me. It was my last piece of her, my last job, my last proof that I hadn't been completely left behind. And it was then, standing in the doorway of the bedroom we once shared, that I decided something. I wouldn't let him take it away from me. Not yet. Not like this. It's not like one day he loved me and the next day he didn't. That's not how distance works, especially between a parent and a child. It's quieter than that, slower. Like paint peeling off the side of a house. At first you don't even notice. But one day, you look up and realize the color is gone. After that conversation about selling the house, I started noticing the small things. The things that once made me feel like part of his world. They stopped happening. He stopped asking how I was doing, not in the polite, automatic way people say, "How are you?" but in the real way, the way where you pause and wait for the answer. When Kian did visit, it was usually on his way to or from something else, a showing, a conference, a dinner. He'd drop by with some takeaway food, say he didn't have much time, and then check his phone during our conversations. I'd ask about the baby, my granddaughter, and he'd say, "She's great, busy into everything," before changing the subject. I never got photos unless I asked. I never got to babysit unless they were out of options. Once I offered to take care of her for a full weekend so he and his wife could rest or go away somewhere. He smiled and said, "Thanks, Mom, but she's a lot of work. We'll let you know." They never did. That weekend, I saw pictures on social media. Them at a resort. Baby with his wife's sister. I stared at those photos for almost an hour, not because I was jealous, but because I'd been erased so thoroughly it hadn't even occurred to them I might see it. I started noticing how my calls were always returned hours later, or not at all. How holidays became short visits with rushed goodbyes. One Christmas, he forgot to get me a present. Not even a card. When I handed him a leather portfolio I'd spent weeks picking out and getting monogrammed, he said, "Oh, I feel bad. I didn't realize we were doing gifts this year." I smiled and told him it was fine, but it wasn't. It was one more reminder that I had become an afterthought in my own son's life, a background character, the woman who raised him, fed him, stayed up during his flu nights, drove him to practices, read him books in funny voices. And now, I was the one waiting for permission to feel included. It wasn't just about attention. It was the way he'd talk around me instead of to me. The way his wife would handle all the family decisions without so much as asking what I thought. When I did speak, I often had to repeat myself. Or worse, no one acknowledged I'd said anything at all. Once we were having dinner at their house with some of their friends, and someone brought up retirement. I joked that maybe I'd take up gardening full time. Kian laughed and said, "My mom? She kills every plant she touches." Everyone laughed. It wasn't cruel. It was casual. That's what hurt most, that he saw me not as someone wise or tender or worthy, but as someone to chuckle about. I kept a straight face that night. But when I got home, I went to the small cactus Mira had kept on the windowsill. It was still alive, still green, still mine. I touched the pot and whispered, "I kept this one." It's funny, the things we start clinging to when people begin letting go of us. I clung to that house, to the memories, to the scent of Mira's perfume lingering in the hallway closet. I clung to her letters, her recipes written in smudged pen on stained index cards. I clung to my routines because they were the only place I still had control. Kian didn't yell. He didn't disrespect me in big, loud ways. It was worse than that. He became indifferent. And indifference, that's what truly breaks a heart. Not hate, not anger, but being quietly overlooked by someone who once saw you as their whole world. I began second-guessing myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe I was reading into things that weren't there. But then I'd remember how Mira used to notice everything. The tone in his voice, the way his shoulders slumped when he was tired, the moments he needed a hug but didn't know how to ask. She saw him, and now I was invisible. I went from mom to the lady we should check on sometime. Once he introduced me to a colleague as my mother, Delora. She's retired now, living alone, enjoying the quiet life. Enjoying? That day I went home, stood in the kitchen, and opened a drawer full of Mira's tea bags. I brewed her favorite, chamomile with honey. And as I sipped, I whispered into the empty room, am I losing him? Or did I already lose him, and I'm just too slow to catch up? The silence gave no answer, only the faint creak of the old wood floor beneath my chair. Only the realization that even silence, when stretched long enough, starts to echo. It was Kian's wife, Brielle, who planned the brunch. A sleek little gathering at their new condo with high ceilings, matte black fixtures, and not a single speck of warmth. Everything was curated. The marble cheese board, the lavender-scented napkins, the playlist humming jazz covers of pop songs. It wasn't my world, but I showed up on time with a homemade pear tart wrapped in foil. Mira's old recipe. She used to say it tasted like a hug. I stood at the door a few extra seconds before knocking, adjusting my cardigan, telling myself I belonged here because I was family. Brielle opened the door and gave me a kiss on the cheek, already distracted by the baby crying somewhere in the back. Oh, good, you're here. Just set that, somewhere. She gestured vaguely toward the counter, which was already crowded with store-bought pastries and sparkling wine bottles. I found a spot between the chia muffins and the smoked salmon. No one noticed the tart. The guests started arriving. Couples from Kian's work, new neighbors, one of Brielle's friends from yoga who smelled like eucalyptus and looked like she'd never known a day without rest. I stayed quiet, smiling when appropriate, nodding when spoken to. I was the oldest one there by at least 20 years, and I felt it. Kian floated through the room like he was hosting a real estate open house. Confident, polished, charming. Occasionally, he'd touch my shoulder in passing and say, "You okay, Mom?" and then disappear again before I could answer. At one point, I heard a man, tall, balding, a tech startup investor, ask Kian about the house he and Brielle were hoping to buy in the spring. Still planning on the place in Crestview? Yeah, Kian said, if the numbers work. Might have to get a little help from Mom here. He laughed and pointed a thumb in my direction. She's been sitting on that old house forever. It's time she cashes in and gets herself a condo with heating that actually works. People chuckled, not cruelly, just enough to sting. My face flushed hot. I kept my eyes on my cup, pretending I hadn't heard, but he wasn't done. She's still got her husband's books in the study, he added with a grin. We told her she could donate them, but I think she's waiting for the Smithsonian to call. More laughter. Someone muttered, "Boomers and their stuff, man." I smiled tightly and took a sip of coffee, though it had long gone cold. Just a joke, just a little laugh. But something inside me caved. They didn't see it. The way I gripped the edge of the counter, the way my throat tightened. All I could think was, this is how it happens. This is how you disappear. One small laugh at a time. I excused myself to the bathroom, shut the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were glassy, but I refused to cry. I applied a little lipstick, smoothed my blouse, and forced a breath in through my nose. "You are not fragile," I whispered to my reflection. "You are not furniture." I came back out with a smile, sat down quietly on the edge of the couch. No one asked where I'd been. No one offered me food. The tart remained untouched. Near the end of the brunch, Kian stood to give a little toast, thanked everyone for coming, said how grateful he was to be building a life in the city, how proud he was of their progress. He raised a glass, looked at Brielle, and said, "None of this would be possible without my wife, my team, and the people who support us every day." He didn't look at me, not once. I sat there clapping politely with the others while my hands shook inside. That evening back at home, I carried the leftover pear tart in from the car and set it on the counter. The crust had cracked slightly. I cut a slice for myself and ate it in silence, the sweetness turning bitter in my mouth. That night, I opened Mira's old recipe journal and found the page where she wrote, "Delora's favorite. Use firm pears, extra cinnamon." Her handwriting was gentle, almost musical. I touched the words with my fingers and whispered, "They don't remember you, Mira." Not like they should. And maybe they didn't remember me either. At least, not the version that mattered. At brunch, I wasn't someone who had carried a son through sleepless nights, who had comforted a grieving husband through career setbacks, who had shared inside jokes and built forts and kissed scraped knees. I was just Mom. Just a name attached to a signature. Just a source of equity. I went to bed that night with the taste of shame on my tongue, curled on the edge of my mattress, wondering when exactly I stopped being someone people listened to and started being someone they talked about like she wasn't in the room. The day I started packing, it wasn't storming. It wasn't dramatic. No one yelled. No one slammed doors. There was no final straw. It was just Tuesday. I stood in the hallway holding one of Mira's old scarves, deep green silk, the one she wore to Kian's graduation. And I realized I hadn't seen her face in a photo frame in weeks. They were still in the house, but I had stopped looking. Maybe because it hurt, or maybe because I was starting to forget how it felt to be in a home where I was wanted, not just tolerated. I folded the scarf carefully and placed it in the box beside her cookbooks and a small ceramic trinket dish she loved. I labeled it "Keep Bedroom." I wasn't sure where I was going to put them yet, but I knew they were coming with me. I wasn't angry. That's the part people don't understand. I wasn't slamming my fist on the table or screaming in the driveway. I wasn't burning bridges. I was slowly stepping off a stage where no one had clapped in years. Over the next few days, I began sorting through the life Mira and I had built, drawer by drawer, closet by closet, not with rage, but with reverence, like I was closing a beloved book whose last page had long been turned. When Kian called on Friday to ask if I could babysit the following weekend, I said gently, "I'm sorry, I'll be busy moving some things." He hesitated. "Moving where?" "I'm thinking of finding a smaller place." "You were right, Kian. The house is a lot for me." Silence. Then a cautious, "Do you need help with realtors?" "I know some good—" "I'll handle it," I said. And I could feel it, even through the phone. The shift. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't sad, just relieved, like he had finally gotten what he wanted without having to push again. That night, I stood in Mira's garden, the one we planted together on our 25th anniversary, and pulled the last of the withered basil from the soil. The earth smelled tired. So did I, but I was not broken. A few weeks later, I found a small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. A faded blue porch, slightly uneven floorboards, and a bathtub that took forever to fill, but it was mine. Just mine. I signed the lease, hired a mover for the heavier items, and began this quiet migration into a smaller life. Kian didn't offer to help. He sent a short text. "Hope the move goes smoothly. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply. On moving day, I looked around the empty house one last time. Every corner held something sacred. Mira's laughter in the kitchen, Koyan's baby footprints in the laundry room tile, my own tears pressed into the pillow I clutched after the funeral. I didn't say goodbye. I simply locked the door, slid the keys into a padded envelope labeled with the realtor's name, and placed it gently in the mailbox. No announcement, no fanfare, just a quiet exit, just like they preferred me to be. The first few nights in the new place were harder than I thought they'd be. The silence felt different here, less familiar, more hollow. I woke up disoriented, expecting the creak of my old floorboards or the hum of Mira's electric kettle from the kitchen. Instead, I heard the faint sound of neighbors arguing through thin walls and the clink of heating pipes settling in their rust, but I unpacked one box at a time, hung a photo of Mira on the wall above the fireplace, planted a new basil pot on the windowsill even though I knew it might not last. I started keeping a journal, not the kind with prompts or structure, where just a cheap notebook from the corner store where I wrote down whatever hurt the most that day. It helped. I kept expecting Kian to visit, or at least call to check in. He didn't. I learned quickly that when you stop giving, some people forget you were ever the one who filled their hands to begin with. That's when it became clear. I hadn't been forced out in the dramatic way we picture in movies. There was no screaming, no betrayal, no big fight. I had simply been gently and consistently made to feel unnecessary, and I had finally listened. That was the saddest part of it all. No one stopped me. No one said, "Please don't go." No one asked, "Why are you leaving?" No one noticed that a woman who had once been the foundation was now just furniture, quietly rearranged to make space for their new lives. But in that silence, I discovered something else. Space. For myself. I no longer had to sit at someone else's table, hoping to be remembered. I had my own, and even if it was smaller, even if it creaked and tilted and wobbled under the weight of memory, it was mine. The first sign that I had truly hit bottom wasn't something loud. It was the day I boiled a pot of tea and forgot I'd made it. I found it hours later, cold and untouched, still sitting on the stove, just like me, waiting for someone to remember. That was the moment it hit me. I had built my entire life around others. Mira's moods, Kian's schedules, meals, birthdays, holidays, doctor's appointments. And now that they no longer needed me, I had no idea what to do with myself. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. My once thick silver curls were always tied back now, not because it looked neat, but because I didn't have the energy to brush them out. My clothes hung looser. I wasn't eating well. Some nights, I couldn't even remember what I had eaten at all. And the silence. It wasn't peaceful like I'd once imagined it could be. It was heavy, pressed into my chest like a stone. It followed me from room to room in that little rental house with the cracked linoleum floor and the outdated light switches, the kind of place that felt like it had already given up before you even moved in. I started avoiding the living room. It had too many shadows. I spent most of my time in the kitchen, sitting at the small wooden table by the window, staring outside at the alley where trash bins lined up like soldiers. At least they had a purpose. One evening, it rained hard. The kind that drums on the windows and drowns out thought. I made a bowl of instant soup and sat in the dark with just the stove light on, listening to the downpour. I tried reading, but the words floated on the page like strangers. That night, something inside me cracked in a way I hadn't let happen before. I found an old box of Mira's things I had refused to unpack. Inside were some scarves, a dried flower pressed in a book, and a pair of her glasses, still smudged with fingerprints. I held them in my hands and started sobbing, the kind of sobbing that takes over your whole body. My shoulders shook. I gasped for air. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something broken trying to become whole again and failing. I missed her. God, I missed her. She had been the one person who made me feel seen, not just loved, but witnessed. If I was quiet, she noticed. If I hurt, she asked. If I felt invisible, she reached for my hand under the table. Now I could disappear for days and no one would notice. No one called, no one checked in. Even the baby, my own granddaughter, Yi, was growing up in pictures I didn't receive. I'd only seen her twice since the move. Once I saw a mother and grown son at the grocery store bickering over cereal. She told him he always forgot what brand she liked. He teased her and kissed her cheek. I stood frozen in the canned goods aisle, gripping a tin of chickpeas until my fingers hurt. Not from jealousy, but from grief for something I never thought I'd lose. Kian hadn't done anything unforgivable. That was the hardest part. If he'd screamed at me, hit me, cut me off, and I could point to it. I could say, "This is why." But there was no moment, no single wound, just a slow dissolving of matter, like water washing away the lines of my identity. And what was left? A woman in her 60s with a quiet phone, a cold teapot, and no real reason to get dressed before noon. There was one morning I remember vividly. I was sitting in that stiff kitchen chair, staring at a blank piece of paper. I had tried to write a letter. To who? I didn't even know. But my hand hovered over the page, pen tip shaking, and I couldn't even find the words for what I felt. So I wrote only one sentence. "If no one remembers you, do you still exist?" I read it over and over again, then I ripped it up. But the question stayed. The lowest point wasn't the loneliness. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the forgotten holidays or the unopened tart. It was realizing that I had spent my whole life giving. And no one remembered to leave me a seat at the table once they were full. And yet, in that darkness, something very small, very quiet began to stir. Because rock bottom, painful as it is also solid. And solid is something you can stand on, even if your legs are shaking. The discovery came when I wasn't looking for anything, which I suppose is how the most important things in life tend to show up. I had decided to clean out the last unopened box from the move. It had sat quietly in the corner of the bedroom for weeks, still sealed, still taped shut with Mira's handwriting on the side in black marker. Office. Misk. I'd avoided it, assuming it was just old mail or notebooks. But that morning, I needed something to do with my hands. Something that didn't involve staring out the window or feeling sorry for myself. I opened the box and slowly began sorting. Some of Mira's old journals, a few random cords we never identified, a cracked picture frame, an unopened envelope with no stamp, no return address, just Kian's name written across the front in Mira's unmistakable script. To Kian, when you need me most. I froze. My heart didn't race. It dropped. I sat back on the floor, legs crossed, the envelope resting like something sacred in my lap. Her handwriting. Rounded letters. The way she looped her K had always made me smile. I ran my fingers over the ink like it was a relic. Then I noticed something else. Taped to the back of the envelope was a sticky note. It was addressed to me. Delora. Give this to him when your heart says it's time. Not when he asks, not when he demands. When he forgets who we are, remind him. Then my hand started to tremble. This wasn't just a letter. This was her voice, her clarity, her love and her warning. And it had waited patiently all this time for the right moment. Tears welled up. But they weren't the kind that come from grief. They came from something else, something harder to name, a kind of recognition. Because in that moment, I realized she had seen this coming. Mira had known, long before I ever admitted it, that the bond between a parent and a child could stretch so far it disappeared. She had known that Kian might forget the sound of his roots, and she had trusted me to bring him back. I held the envelope like it was glass, stood up slowly, walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and just sat at the table, staring at it. So many thoughts flooded in. Should I read it first? No, it wasn't mine. Should I send it in the mail? No. He'd open it when distracted or alone, and this needed to be witnessed. Should I wait until he asks for something again? Maybe. And then I realized something I hadn't fully admitted until then. Kian had already asked. He had asked me for something incredibly personal, incredibly transactional. My name, my financial credibility, my signature. And he hadn't once stopped to ask how I was doing, how I had been surviving, whether I was okay, whether I missed Mira as deeply as he claimed he did. He had forgotten who we were. And Mira's letter, this unopened echo of her soul, was the only thing left that could speak loud enough for him to hear. It was, in every way, the last gift she ever gave. I placed the envelope in a small velvet pouch and tucked it into the top drawer of my desk. I didn't rush. I didn't call Kian. I didn't send a text saying I had something for him. This wasn't going to be on his schedule. This was going to be on mine, and I made a quiet vow to Mira, right then and there. When the time comes, I'll give it to him, but not before, not 1 second before. Later that night, I made tea, and this time I drank it. I put on Mira's favorite cardigan, sat under the old throw blanket we both loved, and I held that envelope again, pressing it gently to my chest like I could feel her heartbeat through the paper. I whispered aloud into the empty room, "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Because Mira had left me more than a letter to deliver. She had left me a reason to keep standing, a role to reclaim, a final act that would remind both Kian and me that silence isn't weakness and distance doesn't mean forgotten. And as the rain tapped softly against the window that night, for the first time in months, I felt something in my chest that wasn't grief. It was purpose. Something changed after I found that letter. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music swelling in the background, no sudden shift in posture, no grand speech whispered to the mirror. It was subtle, like opening a window in a room that had been shut for years. The air started to move again. For weeks after I placed Mira's letter in the top drawer, I went about my life quietly, but something inside me had straightened. I walked with less weight in my shoulders. I stood a little longer at the window, not just staring, but seeing. The neighbor's tulips blooming, the mailman's cheerful wave, even the way the wind shook the trees. It was like I had been underwater and suddenly remembered how to breathe. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't suddenly happy, but I had clarity, and clarity is power. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I woke up and made my bed, not because anyone would see it, but because I would. I cooked myself real meals again. I found an old notepad and started writing down recipes, just the way Mira used to do, except these were mine. They didn't have to be perfect. They just had to be mine. Then came the day I signed up for a class at the local community center. Writing for memory. 10 other women sat in that room, all different ages, backgrounds, stories. We wrote small pieces about things we'd forgotten and things we could never forget. I wrote about Kian's first loose tooth, about the time Mira burned the turkey but we ate it anyway, about the way grief settles in your joints like winter. And when I read aloud, I didn't shake. One woman approached me after class, tears in her eyes, and said, "I lost my daughter. I haven't written about her in years, but you reminded me why I should." I smiled. A real one. The kind that starts behind the eyes. That night, I walked home with my coat open, letting the night air hit my skin. I felt awake, present. Like the woman I had been, the woman Mira had loved, was still somewhere inside me. She had just been buried beneath years of being needed and then forgotten. I opened the drawer where I'd placed Mira's letter and touched the pouch gently. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I just wanted her to know I was still keeping my promise, that I hadn't forgotten, that I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't retreating either. Then I did something I never thought I would. I called Kian, not to ask for anything, not to check in, just to talk. He answered, distracted. "Hey, Mom, can I call you back?" "I'm heading into a meeting." I said, "No rush. Just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause, a beat, and then something softer. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you tonight." He didn't, but I wasn't crushed this time, because I hadn't called for him. I had called for me, to prove I could still reach out without losing pieces of myself in the process. I started writing again, not just memories, but thoughts, opinions, ideas, things I hadn't allowed myself to believe mattered anymore. One afternoon, I found a small independent bookstore downtown offering open mic nights for writers. I signed up. I read a short piece titled "Things a Mother Learns in Silence." There were 6 people in the audience. 2 clapped politely. One woman wiped her eyes. I felt seen. And I realized something as I walked home that evening. I was no longer waiting for Kian to notice me. I was no longer holding my breath for a seat at a table he barely pulled out for himself. I was building something of my own. Every day, I grew a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more sure of the fact that motherhood doesn't end when the child forgets you. It doesn't even end when the world grows quiet. It only ends when you forget who you are. And Mira's letter, the one waiting silently in my drawer, wasn't just for Kian, it was for me too. A reminder that I still had a voice, that even if no one listened, I could still speak, still write, still live. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as Delora. That name had weight again. That woman had weight again, and she was quietly returning. I didn't announce it. I didn't write Kian a long message or call Brielle for advice. I didn't drop hints in conversation or seek approval. I simply began, in silence. The change started with small, deliberate decisions, ones that no one else would notice, but that recentered me. I went to the bank and closed the joint account Mira and I had opened decades ago. The one Kian's name had been quietly added to after she passed for convenience. I opened a new account in my name only, transferred everything over, quietly, completely. Next, I visited the lawyer Mira, and I had used for our will. She had helped us set up our estate years ago when Kian was still in college. I hadn't spoken to her since Mira's funeral. When I called, she said, "It's good to hear your voice, Delora. I've been wondering how you were doing." "I'm ready to make a few changes," I told her. She didn't ask why. At our meeting, I explained what I needed. I wanted to create a new trust, something with conditions, not to punish, but to protect, to guide, to ensure that my assets, our house, Mira's collections, the money we saved our whole lives, would go exactly where I believed it should. She looked at me with a small smile. "You've thought this through." "Yes," I said, "and it has to be done quietly. No letters, no phone calls, just clear binding documents that would outlast a shrug or a forgotten phone call." I wasn't playing a game. I was rewriting the rules of my own life. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of memory. Because Mira would have wanted our legacy, our love, to mean something, not to be reduced to a down payment or a co-signed loan. After that, I began going through old paperwork. Mira had kept everything: warranties, medical bills, tax records going back decades. It was overwhelming but cleansing. Each file I shredded felt like dust being lifted from the corners of my spirit. I was curating the life I wanted to leave behind. Not a mess, not confusion, but clarity. I also made another decision. I wrote my own letter, not to Kian, not to Brielle, not even to my granddaughter, who was still too small to understand. I wrote it to myself. It started like this: "Delora, you have always given, but you are allowed to keep something for yourself now. This quiet season is not your ending. It's your return." I didn't share it with anyone. I folded it and placed it behind Mira's, tucked into the same drawer. 2 letters, 2 women, 2 truths waiting to be read. From the outside, nothing had changed. Kian still called every few weeks, usually when he needed a detail from the house deed or a signature on some financial paperwork. I responded politely. briefly, with boundaries. Brielle sent an invitation to a brunch, another one, and I declined, saying I had a community event. She didn't ask which one. The distance remained. But this time, I had built it intentionally, not as a wall, but as a line. And with every quiet step I took, something shifted beneath the surface. A tension started to grow, not in me, but around me. Because people can sense when the energy they used to take for granted is no longer freely given. They can sense when your silence stops being weakness and becomes strength. I wasn't trying to teach Kian a lesson. I was just making sure I didn't forget mine. One afternoon, I got a message from an old friend, one I hadn't spoken to since Mira's service. Her name was Irene, and she'd been Mira's teaching partner for years. We met for lunch at a small cafe, and I told her a little about what had happened. She leaned in and said, "Do you know what Mira used to tell me when she talked about you?" I shook my head. She said, "Delora is the spine of our story. You don't always see it, but without her, nothing would stand." I didn't cry, but I felt something tighten in my throat, something good, something necessary. I walked home from that lunch slower than usual, letting those words settle into me like soil around roots. I wasn't invisible. I was structural. I was essential. And I was preparing, not for a confrontation, not for a collapse, but for a moment of truth. One that would come not when I forced it, but when Kian did, because eventually he would need something again. And when he did, I would be ready, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with her letter and mine, and the power to say, "If you want my signature, you need to hear my silence first." It started with a voicemail. "Hey Mom, could you give me a call when you get a chance? I have something I'd like to run by you, nothing urgent." His voice was light, relaxed, but I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when he needed something but didn't want to admit it yet. I waited 2 days before calling back, not out of spite, not to teach him a lesson, but because, for once, I wasn't rushing to be available. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, there you are. I was starting to think you were avoiding me," he joked. "I've been busy," I said gently. "Oh yeah?" There was a pause. "Everything okay?" "Everything's just fine," I replied, and I let the silence hang just long enough to let him feel it. Not cold, just still. "Well," he cleared his throat, "so the thing I wanted to ask you about, we found a house. It's in Crestview. Amazing neighborhood. It's a bit above our pre-approval, but if we can swing this, it's a solid investment. We just need a little help to make the numbers work." There it was, the ask. "Help how?" I asked, even though I already knew. "We were hoping you'd be willing to co-sign the loan," he said. "Your credit score would lock in a better rate, and honestly, the bank just needs some reassurance. It's purely technical. You'd never be on the hook for anything." I took a long, measured breath, and then I said what I had been quietly preparing for weeks. "I'll consider it," I told him, "but only if you come by the house." He hesitated. "You mean the old place?" "No," I said. "The one I live in now. I want to talk in person." "Oh, sure. Yeah, we can do that. I'd like it to just be you, not Brielle, not the baby." "Okay," he said, sounding cautious now. "When?" "This Sunday. Come by after lunch." I hung up before he could ask questions. And just like that, the power began to shift. Not because I was withholding anything, but because I was no longer giving everything away. That Sunday, he arrived right on time. He wore one of his tailored coats, holding a folder in one hand and his usual bright confidence in the other. He stepped into my small rental house and paused. It was the first time he'd seen it. "This is cozy," he said, glancing around. His eyes landed on the bookshelf filled with Mira's old hardcovers, the vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, the handwritten recipe card I'd framed and hung by the sink. I didn't apologize for the smallness of it. I offered him tea. He said no. I sat across from him at the table and let him lay out the loan papers. He talked fast. Numbers, comps, interest rates, closing costs. I let him finish without interruption. When he finally stopped, I leaned back and said, "Before I sign anything, there's something I need you to read." He looked confused. "Okay." I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the velvet pouch. I placed it on the table gently, like it held something far more valuable than paperwork. "This is a letter," I said. "From your mother. She wrote it before she passed. She left it for you. Told me to give it to you when I felt it was time." His face changed. The confidence slipped just a little. "I haven't read it," I said. "It's not mine to read, but if you want my name on your papers, you'll need to read hers first, out loud." There was a long silence. His hand hovered over the envelope, unsure. "I'm not trying to make this a condition," I added quietly. "I'm trying to make sure you hear her voice. One last time." He looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time in a very long while. And then, slowly, he opened the envelope. The letter crackled as he unfolded it. He cleared his throat, blinked a few times, and began to read. "My dear Kian." Mira's words filled the room. Software loving. Director. She spoke of the little boy he once was, the fire in him, the tenderness, the years we spent as a family, the ways love can become routine, and how we must choose to see the people who gave us the lives we now live. She wrote of me, not with bitterness, but with reverence. "Your mother is not loud, she is not demanding, but she is the reason our world was steady. If you are reading this, it means she still believed in you. Don't let her down." By the time he reached the last line, his hands were shaking. He folded the letter and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he looked at me, eyes red, and said, "Why didn't you give me this sooner?" I smiled gently. "Because you didn't need it then." He sat back, and for the first time in years, he looked small again. Not weak, just honest, just real. He looked like my son. And I, for the first time in years, felt like someone who still mattered. After Kian finished reading the letter, the room fell into a silence I didn't rush to fill. He sat there, eyes lowered, his fingers resting lightly on the envelope. I could tell he was still trying to process it. Mira's words had landed in places he hadn't visited in years. And now he was sitting in my modest little kitchen, no longer speaking in figures or interest rates, but carrying the weight of a truth he couldn't unhear. I didn't look at the loan documents. I didn't touch my tea. I just sat still, not cold, not punishing, just present. Kian finally spoke. "She really wrote all that? About you?" I nodded. "She saw things you didn't, that most people didn't." He looked up, and for the first time in years, there was no charm, no performative affection, just a quiet, honest question. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I did," I said softly. "Just not in ways you were taught to hear." He swallowed hard, his gaze drifting around the room. It landed on the framed photo of Mira and me in the garden, arms around each other, hands dirty with soil, both of us laughing. He'd taken that photo. He'd once called us his team. I reached down and pulled out a folder. Not the one he brought, but the one I had prepared weeks earlier. It was thicker, more carefully arranged. I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked. "My trust, my legal documents, my decisions." He opened it slowly and started scanning. I could see the moment his eyes widened slightly. There were stipulations, clear ones, about how my estate would be handled, about the house, about Mira's personal collection, about the granddaughter I rarely saw, and about him. "I set up a structure," I explained, "not to cut you off, not to punish you, but to protect what Mira and I built. This isn't about money, it's about meaning." Kian nodded slowly, still reading. "If you choose to accept my help on your loan," I continued, "you'll need to meet the terms I've laid out here. Not just legally, personally." He looked up. "Like what?" like remembering where you came from, like making space, real space, for me in your life. Not out of obligation, but out of understanding. He blinked. I didn't realize it got this far. It didn't get anywhere, Kian, I said. You just stopped looking. There was no bitterness in my voice, just quiet truth. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. I guess I got wrapped up. Life moves fast. And it moves past people who no longer serve its purpose, I said. I know, I felt it. There was no yelling, no crying, no demand for an apology. Just the clean cut of recognition. The moment someone finally sees the outline of the person they've been standing in front of all along. You know, I added, I thought about just saying no, flat out. I had every right to. But Mira left you that letter for a reason, because she believed at some point you'd stop hearing your mother and start listening to her. Kian's eyes filled, and this time he didn't look away. I'm sorry, he said. Truly. I didn't mean to make you feel like you were nothing. But I did, I replied. He nodded. You did. And in that moment, not when he asked for the loan, not when he read the letter, but right then in his admission, the power shifted completely, not because I won, but because he saw me, because I no longer had to beg to be heard. I no longer had to perform my value. I had already defined it and put it in writing. And whether or not he agreed, that was his choice. He reached across the table, touched my hand. I want to be better, he said. Then be, I replied. But not for me, for your daughter, so she never grows up wondering what her grandmother sounds like. We sat there in silence for a while. Not heavy, not strained, just two people, a mother and a son, sitting in the truth between them. And this time, he didn't rush to leave. He stayed, and I stayed seated, not invisible, not useful, not needed, just me. And finally, that was enough. About a week after that quiet meeting at my kitchen table, Kian called again, but this time there was no pitch in his voice, no urgency, no request. He just said, Mom, can we talk again? I've been thinking about everything. He came by on a Tuesday evening unannounced, holding a box of pastries from that old bakery Mira used to love. He placed them on the table and said, I thought you might like the lemon scones. They were your favorite, right? He remembered. That small act, remembering a flavor, felt bigger than the loan, bigger than the trust. It was the first time he had reached toward me, not just through me. We talked for hours, not about interest rates or home equity, but about Mira, about the early years, about how it felt to lose someone so central that the whole family shifted like loose soil after a quake. And for the first time, he said something I hadn't heard in years. You've always been the quiet one. I guess I confused that for not needing anything. I told him, that's the trouble with silence, Kian. It makes people comfortable until they realize what was holding everything together is gone. We laughed. We cried a little. And at the end of the night, I handed him a signed copy of the co-sign form. I trust you, I said. But now you know what that trust actually costs. He nodded, his hand steady this time as he took it. There was no celebration, no smugness, just a respectful quiet. But the final justice didn't come that night. It came later. When Kian invited me to the new house, I wasn't expecting much. A tour, a polite nod, maybe a room painted in soft neutrals. But what I found when I walked through those doors left me speechless. Just inside the entryway, hanging on the wall beneath a small sconce, was a framed letter. Mira's letter. He'd had it professionally preserved, matted in soft ivory, placed behind glass. I walked toward it slowly, as if it might disappear. The envelope was there too, neatly sealed and mounted beside it. A small brass plaque underneath read, Her voice built our home. I turned to him. My throat tightened. You framed it? I wanted to remember, he said. Not just the words, the moment. what it cost me to forget. He walked me through the rest of the house, bright, modern, open, but it was that one wall near the door that changed everything. The final justice wasn't that I got to say, "I told you so." It wasn't even that he admitted his fault. It was that Mira's voice, so often quieted, so long gone, had been restored to the very foundation of his new life. It was in the framing, the placement, the plaque. It was a kind of justice that couldn't be negotiated, only earned. Before I left, he walked me to the backyard where a small tree had just been planted in the corner. "I want her here too," he said. "She loved gardens." "She did," I said, smiling through tears. "She believed they were proof that life always wants to grow back." He nodded. "I think I'm finally ready to grow back too." He hugged me. A real hug, both arms, both hearts. No rush, no pretending. And that was the justice Mira had hoped for all along. Not revenge, not control, just remembrance, a return, a reckoning without rage, and most of all, a rebuilding, not on guilt, but on truth. Later that week, I received a package in the mail. No note, no return address. Inside was a leather-bound book titled Letters We Never Read. On the inside cover, in Kyan's handwriting, it said, "For you, for her, for everything I almost missed. Love, Kay." I placed the book next to Mira's old journal, smiled, and whispered, "He heard us, Mira. He really heard us." And that was the twist. That justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes in ink and walls and small brass plaques that make a woman feel like she never really left. The next time Kyan came over, he wasn't alone. He didn't text ahead. He didn't call to ask if it was a good time. He just knocked on my door late one Sunday morning, and when I opened it, there he was, standing on the porch with his daughter in his arms. She was older now. Toddlers grow fast when you're not looking. Her curls were tied in uneven bunches, her cheeks full and rosy. In her tiny hands, she clutched a soft gray stuffed animal by the ear. Kyan smiled, not the polished, professional smile he used at open houses, but a softer, uncertain one. "I was wondering," he said, "if you had time for some company." I stepped back and opened the door wider. Always. He walked in slowly, scanning the house again, this time with new eyes. He noticed things. The knitted throw over the couch, the picture of Mira tucked into the edge of the mirror, a set of 2 empty teacups already waiting on the table, out of habit. "I hope it's okay we just showed up," he said, placing his daughter gently on the rug near the coffee table. She sat down with a thud and began pulling blocks out of her little backpack. "It's more than okay," I said, kneeling beside her. "I've been waiting." He watched us for a moment, hands in his pockets, unsure of what to do with himself. For so long, I had been the one unsure. Now he was learning what it felt like to step into someone else's pace, to match instead of lead. He sat down slowly on the edge of the couch and exhaled. "She's been asking about you, well, asking about Grandma Deli. That's what Brielle told her to call you." I smiled. Grandma Deli. I like that. He looked away, embarrassed. "I should have brought her sooner." I didn't say, "Yes, you should have." I didn't list the birthdays, holidays, or quiet Sundays I'd spent alone. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up one of the blocks and started building a small tower with the little girl. She smiled at me, wide and shameless, and said, "Higher." "Higher it is," I whispered, carefully placing another piece. Kyan watched us in silence, eyes a little glossy. "I don't know what I was so afraid of," he finally said. "You weren't afraid," I replied. "You were distracted. There's a difference." He nodded. "That letter, it didn't just wake me up, Mom. It made me look at myself, and I didn't like what I saw." I looked up at him. "But you kept looking. That's the part Mira would have been proud of." He smiled again, this time without shame. After we played for a while, I brought out lunch, simple grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, the kind Mira used to make on cold days. Keon laughed when he tasted it. I haven't had this since middle school. You always asked for extra cheese, I said. He smiled and dipped his sandwich into the soup just like he used to. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were a family again. Not the same, not complete, but real, honest. His daughter reached out her hand mid-bite, touching the framed photo of Mira on the bookshelf. "Who's that?" she asked, tilting her head. Keon paused. "That's your grandma, Mira." "Where is she?" I watched his face as he tried to answer. "She's in the garden," I said softly. "In the flowers and the trees. She loved you before you were even born." The little girl stared at the picture for a long moment, then nodded in that wise, quiet way children sometimes do, and I realized something. This wasn't just a visit. This was a return, not to how things were, but to how they could be. That afternoon before Keon left, he stood at the door a little longer than usual. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," he said. "I want her to grow up knowing you, really knowing you." "You still have time," I said. "We all do." He looked down, then back up at me. "And I want to know you too. The real you. The one I've been too busy to see." I didn't say, "I've been here all along." I just touched his shoulder and said, "Then start showing up. The door's open." He nodded, kissed his daughter's head, and they left with a promise. Not spoken, but felt. A promise to return. A promise to remember. Later that evening, I sat on the couch with Mira's letter in one hand and a drawing in the other. A crayon sketch the little girl had made of me, her, and a flower in the sun. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And as the sunlight faded through the window, I realized I no longer needed anything from Keon. Not his apologies, not his approval, not even his presence. But now, he was offering all three anyway. Not because I demanded it, but because I no longer needed it. And that was the real return. It was a quiet Thursday morning when I finally sat down to write again. Not in my journal, not in a letter, but just for myself. No audience, no purpose, no deadline. Just words on paper like I used to do when Mira was still here, and the world felt smaller, slower, more tender. The light coming through the kitchen window was soft and golden, brushing gently over the worn wood of the table. Mira's teacup sat beside me, empty but still warm. Outside, the basil on the windowsill was beginning to flower. Something Mira used to say only happened when the plant felt safe, and I realized, for the first time in a long while, so did I. I walked out back into the little yard behind the rental. Modest, a bit overgrown, but full of things Mira would have loved. A small bird bath, 2 pots of lavender, a low bench I'd found at a thrift shop, and in the far corner, just past the fence line, a rose bush beginning to bloom. I'd planted it months ago, unsure if it would survive the cold, but there it was, reaching, alive. I sat on the bench, Mira's letter in my lap, and just listened, to the birds, to the breeze, to my own breath. So much had happened, and yet the world hadn't ended. I had been forgotten, yes, but I had also been remembered. And not just by Keon, but by me. That was the true reckoning. Not the moment my son apologized or hung a framed letter on his wall, but the moment I stopped waiting to be seen and chose instead to stand. Fully, quietly, and with grace. Mira used to say, the most powerful women aren't the ones who speak the loudest. They're the ones who choose their moments. This had been mine. Not a scream, but a stillness. Not revenge, but remembrance. Not control, but peace. And that's how I'll spend the rest of my days, not proving myself, not hoping someone finally understands what I gave, but planting things that might outlive me. Letters, gardens, time. That evening, I took out the framed drawing my granddaughter made and hung it beside Mira's picture. 3 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. In the middle, she had drawn me taller than the others, smiling. In crayon, she'd written, "My grandma makes everything grow." Maybe I do. Maybe I did. This wasn't just a story about a son asking for a signature. It was about a mother remembering her worth after being quietly forgotten. It was about legacy and the strength it takes to stay soft in a world that slowly erases you. If this story touched something in you, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Truly.